All right, peace, everyone. We are live. I kind of decided impromptu to go a few minutes ahead of schedule because we were having such a high quality, highbrow pre uh, pre live conversation. So we have a wonderful guest with us. His name is Silas Gauthier. Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Yeah, perfect pronunciation. Yeah.
Thank you. So Silas, I'm subscribed to him on YouTube. His channel is Silas Speaks. Put everything on the description box. He is an author, social and political commentator from Britain. He's a Scotsman. So because of that, we're going to have a Scotland themed live stream. We're going to cover a lot of things. We're also going to answer any of your questions in the chat. Peace, Rebecca. Good to see you, Rebecca. So, I always was fascinated with how Scotland was such a small, it's like a section of a small country, the British Isles, but especially with the Industrial Revolution and onwards, like Scottish people, Scots, like Scottish men, had a pivotal role in shaping the way the modern world works, and they have a huge role in the environment we're in. Canada's first prime minister was a Scotsman, right? MacDonald. Peace, salam alaikum, Hannah. So this is why I'm very interested in speaking to someone from Scotland, someone who's scholarly like Silas. So without further ado, please, Silas, introduce yourself to our audience. A lot of our listeners are already subscribed to you, but for
Hi
those who
there.
aren't, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. Please
No,
finish your point.
no. I was just saying most of our listeners are probably already subscribed to you, but please introduce yourself to those who haven't heard.
Well, salam alaikum.
Alaikum
It's, it's,
salam.
it's, a it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Silas Gautier, and I'm, I guess, a content creator, a writer. I discuss multiple topics, and I'm interested in many, I guess, fields of study. Um, my first book was on the rise and fall of civilizations, what's called anacyclosis, political evolution, and it looked broadly at about 2,500 years of history and the patterns of civilization, how they rise, how they fall, the symptoms of decline, the symptoms of their rise as well,
Mm,
to their zenith. The rest of the books that I've produced and content have focused more heavily on what one could call uh, the rise of the merchant elite and how they have
okay.
shaped history and, of course, still shape our contemporary world today. Um, and I've started to delve into symbolism, Gnosticism,
Hmm.
the occult, and really deciphering, decoding, I guess, de-occulting the esoteric, and how that factors into, again, the rise or political evolution and the rise of the merchant elite. So ultimately, that's what I discuss. And recently, I've started discussing managerialism as well, which I think
Yes,
probably get into.
yes. I I was very curious about this term you use, managerialism. So, are you saying there's like a management class? Like, is this your definition of like the bureaucracy and the deep state? Fill me in, please.
Managerialism, it's not necessarily an ideology, though it acts
Okay.
almost like an ideology when you look at the upper echelons of the ruling class. For example, the World Economic Forum, these various think tanks, even the political salesman class. Of course, they're mere puppets, they're masks of power. But it's interesting because it's neither capitalism or communism that really holds sway anymore ideologically. Even nationalism as well has fell by the wayside. But what
Hmm.
seems to be taken hold within the West, and arguably all across the world, is this quasi ideology called managerialism. And what managerialism is essentially it states that the means of production it is not controlled by the levers of capital or the rulers of the capital or by the labor itself, but by managers.
Hmm.
Managers employ the labor to do things. They take knowledge, they take skills, and they micromanage it. They compartmentalize that management of it for, I guess, uniting it together for the production of a certain thing or for the fulfillment of a certain objective.
Hmm.
So managerialism, ultimately in the political sense, is about engineering the population to exhibit predictable patterns of behavior, which is
Okay.
ultimately what we see going on, of course, in the West, but arguably, as I said, across the world.
Is it
Social engineering, essentially.
social
Sorry.
engineering? Wasn't the original or the founder of the modern discipline of economics, Adam Smith? Wasn't he Scottish?
He was, yes. Yep.
This what you're describing almost sounds like the next chapter to Adam Smith's works on like division of labor and uh, economies of scale, and because I remember uh, reading about how he was the first to, you know, describe how, production can be compartmentalized, where when you're making where you have a factory making nails, you have one guy making the flathead, you have another guy making this part, you have another guy making that part, and now all aspects of industrialization, they apply Adam Smith's division of labor principles in employing people and making and how they work. So I think what you're talking about is kind of like the next step to that, maybe.
Oh, you're absolutely correct. Yeah. Even, of course, David Hume, which was another
Okay, yeah.
Scottish philosopher, he had several treatises and I guess you would call them inquiries into morals and moral judgments. And again, it's laying the foundation. It's a very slow, gradual erosion
Hmm.
that we see within Western society. And by erosion, I mean the erosion of essentially the religiosity that bound the Western mindset together, that bound Christendom together. Um, Funnily enough, as I detailed in my first book, is very similar to the collapse of the Abbasid Caliphate, and it
Okay.
collapsed in a sort of same manner. When it conquered Persia, it
Hmm.
took a lot of the Sasanian customs, which were arguably quite decadent, and
100%.
that was incompatible with Islam.
Hmm.
Thus, what occurred was we call it in the West an Islamic Golden Age. I guess I believe in Arabia or just the Arabic and Islamic world,
Hmm.
they have a word for it that roughly describes it as a dark age. And at the end of this, roughly about, well, of course, once the Mongol hordes invaded
Hmm.
Khwarezmia and then went into Baghdad and essentially collapsed, destroyed,
Yeah,
utterly vanquished the Abbasid Caliphate. That was
like.
the total end of it. But prior to that, maybe the ninth, 10th century, it was already really over,
Hmm.
culturally and such. I mean, you had transgenderism as well, rampant at
100.
that time, and
Yeah,
so similar
slave
things happening in the West. Sorry.
revolt, the Zenge rebellion was happening. Uh, um, they were
Mhm, mhm,
basically uh, having, instead of um, a local militia, which was what helped with, the Arab tribes was what helped with the early futuhat, the early conquests. They moved to hiring mercenaries from Central Asia, mostly
Yep.
Turkic mercenaries, and this is how a lot of the Turkish people came to Islam. So it's like how now the Americans use Colombian mercenaries and and whatnot and Wagner and all that. They were using Wagner, but they were calling them Mamluks, right? They were calling them Mamluks, and they were kidnapping them as boys, little boys, from places in Central Asia and bringing them into the civilized world, the civilized realm like Baghdad and so on, and raising them as slave soldiers. You know, they weren't allowed to marry. And then these very same slave mercenaries took over. Uh, as a matter of fact, I think there was like Baghdad was a concept city. It was a city, a new city by the Abbasids because they were so paranoid of their citizenry. They wanted to make like a new uh, controlled city where they had their minions and their sycophants, and it was a round, circular
Yeah.
city, uh,
Concentric rings. Yeah.
concentric rings. Yeah, like a
This is actually the visualization of managerialism itself.
wow.
It's the same idea. It's exactly what you're saying. Of course, we call it managerialism now, but there was a point in time you'd call it perhaps like a very hyper form of feudalism,
Hmm.
where you have it in China today, where the CCP are so unbelievably. I mean, you have it in the West as well, but it's a bit more concealed. But in China, the CCP are just so absolutely paranoid of their citizenry that they try and control public gatherings and things such as that. Of course, the West are doing that today as well.
Yeah.
So China is not unique in that regard, but it's the same idea. It is managerialism. What you're saying is completely correct. Bureaucracy tends to take hold as well, and you find that the urban elite wall themselves off.
Hmm.
Um, but what you're mentioning, you had the Seljuk Sultanate, the Sultanate of Rum,
Right.
the Mamluk Sultanate, I believe. They obviously famously defeated the Mongols in the 13th century, I believe. But
Yes.
they overthrew, I believe, the Fatimid Caliphate. So
Yes.
you have this, and I believe probably Turkey or the Ottoman Empire succumbed to a similar again over bureaucratization of their system, managerialism.
Hmm.
They eventually collapsed. Um, but back to the Enlightenment and Hume and Smith. Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Hmm.
Smith's economic ideas, this idea of the division of labor, laying the foundations for classical economics. Interestingly, he wrote his famous work, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of Wealth of Nations. That was in 1776. So obviously,
Oh.
you're seeing this revolutionary pattern occurring at that time. It's a inflection point for Western civilization where we see the American Revolution, 10, about 13 years later or so, you would see the foundation of the French Revolution,
Hmm.
the ending of monarchies, the ending of the divine right of kings,
Hmm.
and Smith as well mentioned the invisible hand, I believe, which was
Okay.
a concept regarding how the upper echelons or just market mechanisms can use the self-interest of people
Hmm.
to, I believe he phrased it, to sort of unintentionally benefit society. So people, through their self-interest, they can be funneled or corralled to certain um, to do certain benefits for society. So, for example, construction work, people don't go out to a construction site for the good of their health. They go there to try and better their life,
Hmm.
typically financially. If they're in the management sector of the construction industry, they might be career hungry. But those um, very self-interested, very selfish goals can be used for selfless ends. So again, this is laying the foundation for what would eventually become what we have right now, which is managerialism, essentially.
The yeah the treating of humans as like uh, commodities, I guess.
Exactly. Yep. Well, this stems out of equality. So this is the irony of the whole thing, right? So you have the division of labour and this invisible hand concept of Smith, which sought to turn a negative, selfish behaviour into a positive, which is doing it for the benefit of society, right? Pushing these people into
Mm.
um, satiating their selfishness through financial means, which then benefits society. But you have the complete inverse of that when you come to equality and how it developed within the managerialist mind later on after the period of enlightenment in the late 18th century. So this idea of enlightenment, or as John Locke sort of coined it or phrased it, the tabula rasa, that idea that all men are born equal. We're all
Mm.
born as blank slates. And ultimately, what this led to is like what you're stating, the human resource, viewing humans as cattle, a mere
Mm.
commodity. You
Mhm.
know, pharmaceutical jargon calls it herd immunity. It's this type, but you see it weaves its way into even our language that we utilize. So it's what's called the massification of society.
Mm.
And after the Industrial Revolution, which you're quite rightly you quite rightly stated with your questions,
Mhm.
is that this all came from the Enlightenment era, which was not progress. It wasn't the point where progress started and we left the Dark Age, like what we see in the Abbasid Caliphate. It
Mhm.
was actually a period of decline, but we were so locked in our hubris that we didn't actually understand it as such. We didn't identify it as decline, as the point of our decline. We still, to this day, call it progress.
Yeah,
Um, mhm.
yeah. Please expand on that. Um, what aspects in the Enlightenment phenomenon would you consider, um, looking at it now in 2024, were clear-cut declines from the period? One thing I noticed is us as modern people, we have this embedded in us. Uh, a disdain, a kind of a we don't respect ancient people. We think we progressed and they were all superstitious, illiterate, lower IQ, lower life expectancy, etc., etc. But I don't think I don't think that's true. I think looking back at the people in the Enlightenment era, pound for pound, they were, of a higher quality than modern man. And it seems to be the case even as recently as 200 years ago. Like, just look at how self-sufficient, a rural child was in, rural America. A 12-year-old boy was managing a whole homestead. Um, I remember reading these old newspaper clippings about 12-year-old, 13-year-old kids putting, their farms up for sale and managing stuff. And, you know, um, chivalry, like chivalry was kind of, it's impossible to be chivalrous today, but um, uh, the average medieval person, uh, if he was like an enlightened in their mind guy or girl, they were chivalrous and pious and religious, right? Completely the opposite of what we consider progressive mindset, which is trust the science and all that. So um, I agree. I agree with you on that aspect. You see these
I,
comments.
I think well, firstly, you're totally correct. I mean, you can even see it within the architecture. If if the measure of a good civilization is the way that one utilizes the spatial environment to
Mm-hmm.
create grand architectural wonders and monuments to, usually it's to the divine, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, we are completely lacking the divine in modern Western society. Even in places in East Asia, this is why you have the sort of abhorrent, or it's one of the reasons why you have the abhorrent architectural modern architecture.
So sterile, yeah.
So if good architecture is the measure of a sophisticated civilization, then we are completely unsophisticated. But again, this is the problem with late stage civilizations. At the point where they think, sort of infected by hubris, that they believe that they are the most sophisticated that they have ever been, speaking of in terms of the history that has come before them,
Mm-hmm.
they are actually the inverse is true. But their ego is so self-inflated at that point, like what you're stating, that they don't actually they're not aware of it. They can't identify it. They're It's because they're mentally deformed essentially. Their
Mm-hmm.
psychology is so bent, and the reason for that is ultimately because of empires. When in the beginning, like what you're stating with chivalry, when the or when the civilization begins, or the empire, it will have its upstart phase, its pioneering phase. This is where the great men of the civilization are born. Those are typically warriors. They will go, they will conquer lands. This is exactly what we saw with the Abbasids, by the way. They will go and conquer lands. That
Mm-hmm.
will bring them maybe 50, 60 years past those conquests, and those lands are annexed and absorbed into the territory of the nascent emerging empire. They will they will exploit those lands of natural resources. That will provide them tradable goods, but it will also provide them back in their cities and civilizational spaces.
Mm-hmm.
Within the domestic areas, it will provide them luxury, provide the local population luxuries that they didn't have prior. This mutates, it morphs their psychology,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually, what ends up happening
They
is
become
the
soft.
civilized they become soft. As the civilization progresses, they
Mm-hmm.
put less emphasis on military glory, and that turns into academic credentials or academic degrees. And then that turns into, or prior to that, you have the merchant class and the rise of that. With again, as the warriors conquer land, the merchant class arise to exploit those conquered lands of natural resources. So they eventually put more emphasis on money as well. And as that progresses, then academic clout. And then as that progresses, self actualization and all of these weird progressive mantras, and essentially what you have now with wokeism. You have
Yeah.
hyper individuality. Again, these are things that the Enlightenment promoted.
Wow.
So, primarily, the Enlightenment promoted reason, or that all problems in mankind's general vicinity could be um, could be corrected by the mind of man,
Mm-hmm.
which again leads us to this sort of hubris or self-inflated ego, right? It leads you to blindly reject God
Mm-hmm.
and to believe that man himself can um, can change fate, can change nature, can control nature. Very similar to the Tower of Babel, that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Individualism. So societies only maintain themselves through self-control. Hyper individuality. If you don't view yourself as part or a member of the collective or the society, or every action you take is done purely for your self-interest, which is
Mm-hmm.
of course what Adam Smith stated. Um, so as that progresses, people uh, increasingly see themselves as detached from society, and that they matter more than society. And of course, you get narcissism, which is what you have nowadays with the
Yeah.
likes of the influencer culture. Again, that all stems from the Enlightenment. There's other ideas such as equality and tolerance, Um, I mean, that is just totally, I don't need to go into basic human nature. If
Mhm.
people are very tribal, that seems to be a sort of cross cultural trait the world over.
100%.
And so, really, when you're getting into these all of these ideas, reason, individuality, the separation of church and state as well, which essentially begins the rise of atheism within society. They're all very unnatural states. They're states you're sort of fighting against your own human nature. So tolerance and equality bring forth again that unnatural state.
Mm.
People are very tribalistic. Of course, you have gender norms as well. That's just something you see,
Mhm.
just blatantly. It's a clear fact of nature. But again, that's rejected by the the inheritors of the Enlightenment, essentially. Wokeism, progressivism, all of this. Um, the scientific method is another one,
Mhm.
where, again, with the rise of the scientific method and the secularization of society,
Mhm.
again, the innate need for people to
Mhm.
worship something greater than themselves, that doesn't go away. So what has ended up happening is secular religions. I know it's something that shouldn't happen. It's something that it should be totally an oxymoron,
Yeah,
self-contradictory, but
it's
it's
like a
what you see.
muck religion. Instead of like
Yes,
a McDonald's, it's like a muck religion.
exactly. And well, you get this with climate alarmism. Uh, I mean,
Mhm.
even like what we've mentioned, narcissism, which is
Mhm.
it's a worship of social clout, essentially. Social clout is the new god. The algorithm is the new god.
Yeah.
You get it with uh, as well. Scientism is another.
Mhm.
This idea of trust the science and faith. Um, so essentially, the Enlightenment itself is a complete and utter failure. It's totally anti-human, um, but it tries to suppress human nature, basic human needs like religion, like gender norms,
Mhm.
a need for community as well. That's something you're seeing really affect Western civilization. Um, and it attempts to suppress them through essentially sloganeering. And again, this is leading us to managerialism and the conclusion of the managerialist revolution, I guess.
Mhm. Now, uh, one thing what was my question? Uh, you remind me of this author, Spengler, Oswald Spengler, because he also talks about the different epochs or eras, and he wrote a magnificent book, The Decline of the West. Um, one thing, and this man was brilliant. I don't remember who I was mentioning this to, but if you read that book, he predicted the rise of emojis. Like he wrote this 100 years ago. He said society will uh, uh, compartmentalize everything, including language, and the most optimal use of language and writing is a hieroglyphic type pictographic system. And the way he was describing it, he was literally describing how people text today with emojis and like, subhanallah. So um, he wrote a book detailing, and in his mind, the decline of the West, Christendom, European civilization, all of that started in the 19th century. Like the 20th century was already past like the golden age in his mind, and I kind of agree with him, because World War One was dystopian, super dystopian, and uh, no, everybody was waving their flags and greeting the soldiers in massive crowds. But if you ask them, you know, why are we fighting this war? Because some archduke was necked? It doesn't make no sense. Like nobody would, everybody just knew, uh, you know, war was a good manifestation of the pinnacle of your civilization's, like an aggregor of your civilization, and war is kind of like an, a catalyst needed for things. Like people have always have had that in their minds, and there's truth to it. All our tech today, they develop mostly from trickle down, mostly from military usage, including the internet. So a lot of people were gung ho, but the the war itself made no sense, made absolutely no sense, and the ugliness of it, and how hard all the different adversaries fought, and then continuation with World War II, 2 decades later, and all that. Uh, he was he was on point in describing the decline in Western civilization. In my opinion, the programming class, using Tim Osman's term, I think they knew what Spengler was talking about was right. The pinnacle of what you said about, the military, the warrior classes, and those days were long gone. The conquistadors, and all the, even Christopher Columbus, if he was even a real thing, like, um, that period was gone. The European, the white man, he discovered every facet of the earth. He colonized, he conquered every corner. I think this is why they pushed space exploration, because they said, man, we really need to capture, or we really need to recapture this conquistador, or warrior, uh, Renaissance mindset. This rise. So they tried to manufacture it with a fake uh, endeavor, right? The space, outer space, the moon, and all that. Like they knew it was, yes, but they pushed it because of the generative aspect to civilization. They needed a conquest. They needed conquistadors. That's where the astronaut, the cosmonaut, came into picture. And now with SpaceX and Elon Musk, who I've done a deep dive on him. This guy's not a scientist. This guy is just a blank slate. Like, he's absolutely not real. He's like a character like Trump, in my mind, in my opinion. So they they know there's a prescience in this warrior. Uh, it needs a term. I'm sure there's a better term for it,
Like
like
a warrior ethos, yeah.
warrior ethos. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. So, would you agree with that? That like the Western civilization, which is what modern society, whether you're in Africa or India, uh, you know, the benchmark is this Western initiated world system, world view. Do you think it's declining? And I think you're the perfect person to ask this. What do you think will be replacing it?
But I think it is declining, yeah. I think it is. It's Spengler wrote on what I believe, um, I guess some academics and the social, I guess you would call it social sciences, they call physiognomy, which is essentially it's judging something based on its general appearance uh, relative to the observer. So Spengler essentially was like a spectator looking at, of course, like what you're completely correct, high cultures or epochs of civilization, and firstly he identified that there's a certain symbiosis between the macrocosm and living things and civilization itself and the social constructs of man. I tend to think that is completely correct. In fact, in my first book, I make quite a bit. well, I make mention of Spengler at the beginning, and I believe it's the penultimate chapter. I do pretty major deep dive into
What's
his ideas of decline and such.
what's
Mhm.
the title of your book? Just so that
Well,
your audience can find them.
the first book was titled "Rise and Fall: a discourse upon the phenomenon of civilization and decline." And yeah, basically, I as it states on the tin, that's what I go into, the rise and fall of civilizations. But yeah, of course, I find Spengler he's an extremely interesting character. He also wrote another book after the famous 2 volumes of Decline of the West, where it's called Man and Technics. I forget what that one is actually about now. I read it some time ago, but he mentions that, and he also identifies that these high cultures themselves have a certain what he calls a soul image. I forget the German, but that's the rough translation. So it's for example, in Native American
Mhm,
conceptions of spirituality, they would have this idea of a spirit animal. Well, this spirit
mhm,
animal would encompass who you are
mhm,
characteristically or just spiritually, or the general aura that you would exude to
mhm.
everyone else. And he mentioned that this soul image was a visualization. It was a sort of an all-encompassing idea, a constellation, in German, a Gestalt, that provided a total, again, like hieroglyphics, a visualization of a profound understanding or a profound truth regarding that civilization. So, for the West, for example, he mentioned the soul image of the West as like the Faustian man. Dr. Faust was he who made a deal with the devil for access to forbidden knowledge. Of course, in return,
All right. Yeah.
he sold his soul. So, of course, that's his idea of the West, right? His conception of it. This is the soul image of the West.
Hmm.
He mentions that we should look towards the east, Eurasia, Russia, steppes. That will be the next empire to rise. I believe. I think that's in the second volume of Rise and pardon me, Decline of the West.
Right. Yeah.
Second volume mentions that.
Hmm. Yeah. Whoever I forgot who he was. Someone recommended Spengler to me, and he told me if you just want a quick look into, because it's a very dry read. He said just
Yeah,
start with the second volume, and that's what I did. So
it's very prosaic. It's very
very.
like esoteric. It's the language. The language isn't academic at all. It's not even. It doesn't even
Mhm.
read like a like a not a non-fiction book or something. It's
Yeah,
something that's very. It almost reads like a fiction book or a book of poetry or prose or something like that.
yeah. When he
Yeah.
talks about the Magian, like I never, you know,
Mhm.
like the Magian civilization or the Magian man. Like that's how he describes, Islam, for instance, and the Apollonian was his description for the Greek, I think, civilization. Yeah, it was very poetic, um, and sometimes you have to read a paragraph two, three times to understand what he's really trying to say. I don't know if it's because of the translation, but uh, after you after the first 30 or so pages, you get in a roll, and that's what I found. It was a good read, and that man, if there was an example of what I would call a secular prophet, and wa'udhu billah, he's not a prophet, but I'd say that guy was it because he really understood the trajectory of his society. He really did.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's interesting as well because he mentions of I won't mention his name, but of the Austrian painter. He
Oh
actually mentioned
yeah.
that he was a fanatic, and though people saw him as a savior, he was actually the destroyer of Germany, or he would be the destroyer of Germany, which of course that came to pass. But he was a contemporary of that time period as well. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody talks about the millions of Germans that were killed off after 1945. Like I remember, was it Fakeologist? He had a guest on, and he said in his he was just stating a theory. I don't think he provided proof, but he believes there was 6 million killed, but these were German blonde, the blonde blue eye phenotype. He says that when he went back to Germany after a trip or something, like he couldn't find he couldn't find much blonde people or blue-eyed people. Like most of the people there were dark hair brunettes and whatnot. So there was definitely a culling of Germans, and our Austrian painter had a hand, I think, in that
Mhm.
in Germany being what it is today. Completely, like Germany is such an American colony. I heard the greater Chicago area has a larger, like the police for Chicago has a larger budget than all of Germany is contribution to NATO.
Yeah. Oh, it's completely, and of course everything that's happening with the Russo-Ukraine flashpoint. I mean,
Right,
essentially, Germany are destroying themselves. Of course, Europe's destroying itself.
right.
This is all there's some again when I was looking at so empires are totally artificial. For an empire to come to be uh, without some sort of external backer funding it, providing it resources, perhaps even providing it military or logistical information as well, and technical know-how. And in terms of campaigning, effective sieges, all of this, effective administering of conquered territories, it's very difficult for an empire to actually come into being.
Mm,
Again, it's difficult because it goes against human nature. An
mm,
empire is defined by I guess a supranational or super state that
mm.
has two or more distinct cultures within it.
Oh,
That is completely unnatural to again just human history, human again up to perhaps the early, let's say the early Bronze Age, right?
mhm,
So it's what you tend to find since the at least the old Babylonian Empire. There has been a series rather, of um, empires being conquered by upstarts that are on the hinterland of the empire
mhm,
that are funded by a certain clique, financier clique, if you will.
mm,
They then either open the doors to these conquerors, or open the gates, or they provide them military or logistical information. And of course, they conquer in quick succession that empire. So, for example, the Neo Babylonian Empire was overthrown by Cyrus the Great.
mhm,
Um, he founded the Achaemenid Empire. The Achaemenid Empire was then overthrown by Alexander the Great. Um, and then he founded the Macedonian Empire that split apart after his death.
mhm,
Um, Eventually, that formed into the Seleucid Empire, and
mm.
in time, of course, that was swallowed up by the Roman Republic, eventually the Roman Empire.
Right.
Um, but you tend to find there's a set, and there's still historical records for this of a financier class in the shadows that seem to be,
Always
uh,
present. Yeah.
yeah. So again, an invisible hand. The same thing I think was present, of course, in the First and Second World War. That's a definite. I mean, we have
Mhm.
enough historical record or historical documentation for that.
100%.
It was really ultimately the First and Second World War, though everything that they do is to establish or to fulfill multiple agendas at
Mhm.
once. It was primarily, pardon, to found the state of Israel. That
100%.
that was why it was to provide a justification for it. They couldn't get that justification at the end of the First World War, um, so thus they had to set up within the obviously the Versailles Peace Conference.
Mhm.
It had to be laid with contractually within the treaties. It had to be laid. The foundations had to be laid for the Second World War, which again gave them that justification. And they used the rise of nationalism. I mean,
Yeah.
as well, even the rise of Hitler. Pardon me, the Austrian painter. Pardon.
Mhm.
Um, uh, Hopefully, my accent put off the algorithm there. I do apologize.
No, it's fine.
Um,
Mention him all you want. Don't worry about it. Like
the
it is what it is.
I do apologize. No, I'll mention the Austrian painter. So the rise of the Austrian painter.
Mhm.
Obviously, after the Munich Putsch, he should have been shot for being a traitor to the Weimar Republic, as was the communists.
Mhm.
With the short-lived Bavarian Socialist Republic, he wasn't. He was only put into house arrest, and he was allowed to create that book, My Struggle. Obviously,
Right.
I won't mention the German.
Yeah, I
Um,
know. He wrote it from
and
prison.
yeah, he was funded as well. I mean, he was involved with the military intelligence at the time. Um, Completely funded, of course, as well. I mean, Mussolini uh, did quite a great deal to sabotage the war effort too on the side of the Axis powers. For
Mhm.
example, he invaded Greece,
Okay.
which essentially ensured that the German military, the Wehrmacht, had to conduct Operation Barbarossa 5 weeks after, because obviously they had to head into Greece and neutralize Greece
Right.
because the Italians failed there. So that meant that they were then bogged down in the snow because, again, they left it 5 weeks too late. Um, and obviously that ensured that they lost the war on the Eastern Front. So you have things such as that, just total anomalies, total anomalies that uh, lead one to believe that there was a invisible hand at play there.
Mhm.
Um, Even the Serbian Black Hand as well in Sarajevo with the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and such. I forget the individual's name, but he was, I believe, a Zionist as well.
Oh,
So I do believe, if I'm not mistaken there, I might have to check that, but I do believe he was a Zionist or he had Zionist leanings.
do you think
Um,
all those uh, from that era, all those portraits of public figures with their hand hidden in their coat sleeves, do you think it was representing this hidden hand aspect? Napoleon, Stalin, all these
mhm,
people from back in the day when they posed for photos, they always shoved their right hand in their jacket, uh, 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 in between their jackets or in their pocket or something. Like, do you think that's what they were alluding to? The hidden hand
yes, I mean, that's one aspect of that symbolism. I have
symbol.
notes on that specific
Oh,
hand gesture, but there's another one called the triadic hand claw, which is
oh, I think I heard about that. Let me pull it up.
yeah, you take your so you basically create a W shape. You take your index and middle finger and you join them together, and obviously you spread apart the pinky and the uh, pardon me, you spread apart the pinky and the index finger, and your two middle fingers you hold clasped together, and it creates this sort of W shape. But it's
What's it?
essentially the
What's it
shin
called
hand
again?
layer.
Triadic?
Well, it's called the triadic hand claw.
Okay.
That's the name of it. It's actually the shin hand sign. That's that's really what it is. It's the Shin letter.
Oh,
Um,
found it.
yeah,
Triad, Claw, or Marano secret hand sign. Marano is the crypto Sephardics, right?
yes, the conversos.
The
Yes,
conversos, yeah. Isn't this
yes,
what Spider-Man, the Spider-Man when he's like slinging his web, he makes this sign, and also uh, like all these paintings of Jesus, and they have him making that hand gesture as well. This one.
yes, yes. Also the Star Trek, the
Oh yeah.
I forget what the hand sign is called in
Well,
the Star
yeah,
Trek universe.
they make the V thing with the four fingers.
Yes. Well, that essentially all of that comes from the Kohanim blessing, which is the high priest's blessing,
Oh.
and he does a variation of that. But
Mm,
what it is essentially alluding to, without I'll just be very broad with this, without going into the entire esoteric corpus of it
mm.
and where it traces back to. Essentially, it's the Second Kings 21, 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 7. It mentions that the name or Hashem is of the Lord is written in Jerusalem. It's literally etched into Jerusalem. So
Oh,
Jerusalem is in the shape of the Shin hand, the Shin letter, which
wow.
is the 21st or penultimate letter of the Hebrew or Semitic alphabet. Um, so essentially, that's what it's alluding to. Another person who made that hand sign in his portrait, I think it's the state portrait of him, was the Austrian painter as
Oh,
well.
even him.
Even him. So I believe as well that I forget precisely now what that hidden hand in the vest or coat pocket means now. I forget what it means, but it is something to do with that, the concealed nature of the conspiracy, that idea.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, you get a lot of them. Another one's the when uh, you put your pinky and um, ring finger, you face that downwards. You put your index and middle finger, you face that upwards, and you
Yes,
face your thumb up. That's the Sabazios hand sign as well.
Simbad. Isn't that
Um,
on the Baphomet? The Baphomet is doing that.
so on the Baphomet, it's also they're doing that. So that's pointed up and it's pointed down. So essentially, what that is stating is so three are pointing up, three are pointing down. That creates the hexagram. So the triangular shape. That's
Oh.
something you see within the Freemasonic logo as well. You see it within the Thelemite logo too. It's this idea of unity, the unification of the six or the world,
Hmm.
which leads you to God, or as a that's the sort of mystical idea of it. There's probably something deeper regarding that within Kabbalah, but that's what I can find within the Zohar up to now. And of course, the two as well is referencing the dualistic nature of the world. And of course,
Oh.
the two facing at the bottom, the two facing at the top, that's the square. The
Okay.
square is a Freemasonic symbol as well, but it's a
Right.
symbol relating to the world. Again, the materiality of the world, the material box, the an artificial shape, an artificial shape. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I saw an image of it in the video on your channel. I'm using as a
Mhm.
placeholder. There was one image where the compass is kind of. I don't want to scroll all through, but I know what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about. Now, why do you think? Um, why do you think they have all these secret hand signs and gestures and so on? Is it to communicate between themselves? And
Well, when you have an intersocietal agenda
Hmm.
that seeks to ultimately upend not just that society itself, but every society that where will ever be,
Oh.
and seeks to unify everything under one world dominion. What you have to do to maintain cohesion within that conspiratorial group is to have a religious framework that sets you apart from everyone else. That is how you maintain you maintain cohesion that way. You dehumanize everyone that is out with the, I guess, the compartmentalized, concentric, circular
Okay.
structure of the society, of the secret society, of the conspiracy.
Hmm.
So the hand signs essentially are adding to that from a psychological point of view. It's adding to that social cohesion of the conspiratorial group.
Okay.
It's ensuring that they are thoroughly separated or severed from the rest of the society, so that they can carry out the agenda without any bouts of conscience, or any troublesome attacks of empathy or something like that. So they dehumanize the profane, if you will, as they call them, those outward to the relative to the conspiracy, and
Oh.
in the society itself. So that's the reason why.
Jonathan in the chat has a very interesting comment. He says Freemasonry is forbidden and grounds for excommunication. That sign that you're referring to, Silas, is far older than Freemasonry. Uh,
What sign is that? Is that the hand of Sabazios, or
is that
the?
is that what you're referring to, Jonathan? The hand of Symbasius, or some other symbol? By the way, Freemasonry as a thing, as an institution, it really took off in Scotland of all places, right? Like your neck of the woods. Oh, the Leonard Nimoy.
Ah, right. Okay. So the Shin hand sign. Um, yes, it did. It did go further, but if you, yeah, he's right with the Shekinah. So that goes back to, again. This all traces back. I don't want. I'll be very broad about this, because we might be here longer than 2 hours otherwise. So yeah, the Shekinah is essentially synonymous with the Shakti.
Oh,
And there's a specific yonic pose, which this is within the Dharmic religions, or Vedic uh, cultural framework, I guess, that has that similar shape, if you will, and it's the spreading, it's the spreading of the legs in that sort of yonic pose. It's very similar to the Vesica Pisces as an idea. Um, I have a few infographics regarding it.
okay. Jonathan seems to have some knowledge on the specific hand signs, and he's saying we've conflated three distinct hand signs.
I will respectfully disagree.
Okay.
I do have good grounds to disagree with you. I
Okay.
do have good grounds. I can, if you send me an email at silasspeaks@gmail.com, I can provide you all my notes on it. I do connect it all the way back to the Harappan civilization and the cult of Pashupati, and all of the symbolism is very synonymous.
Harappa
Um,
was in India, right?
yes,
Yes, India.
yes,
Yeah. The Indus Valley, was it?
yeah. So again, we see within the Harappan civilization, which was just at the well, it existed from the mid Copper Age all the way to the end of the Copper Age, in the early Bronze Age. You have Mohenjo-daro, you have also Lothal. Both of them, by the way, within the localized dialects, means mounds of the dead. Of course, that wasn't the names of those cities
Wow.
within their respective contemporary periods. But you had the copper traders there, and not just myself, but other individuals, scholars and such, have mentioned that if you look at Sumeria, they had a lot of cultural overlap, uh, religious overlap as well, with the Vedic, well, I guess you would, the Harappan civilization at
Yeah.
that point in time. So, for example, their priests would shave their heads, which is something you see today within that area. Again, they believe that it ensures that they're closer to the divine. And these ideas, so you see these cultural crossovers, if you will. So there's connections here. So I think the copper traders in Lothal, which is just north of the Gujarat Peninsula,
Hmm.
and also in Mohenjo-daro, which is, it's in, I believe it's in Balochistan, which is modern day Pakistan, I do believe. It's in
Yeah.
that region.
Pakistan
So,
Iran border zone. Yeah, you're right.
yeah. So you had, at that time, you had trade routes stretching, of course, there were sea routes up there as well, the Indus Valley civilization. So those copper traders would have migrated. Along with that, they would have, their culture and religion would have migrated westward. Um, along through the Straits of Hormuz. Um, what we see with the Sumerians is they claim that they were
Mm.
from Bahrain, or what we
Yeah.
believe to be Bahrain. So
Wasn't it called Dilmun or Dalmun back in the day? That was
yes, I believe
the
so. Yeah.
the pre-Semitic name for Bahrain in Arabic has a very interesting meaning, and it's found in the Quran. Bahrain means the two seas. Bahar is sea, and Bahrain is two seas, or
Indeed.
two bodies of water. So, does this refer to the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea, or freshwater and saltwater? Who knows? But there's a Quranic verse about how there's this place where uh, uh, Allah placed a barrier so that salt water and fresh water does not mix, and maybe there's a esoteric meaning to it. But you know who else claimed origin from the island of Bahrain? The Phoenicians.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
Phoenicians,
Hmm.
and it's funny. Today, to this day, Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, claims Bahrain is part of their sovereign axis, but was taken from them by the British and given to one of their little puppet Gulf monarchs. And Saudi Arabia constructed in the 80s a causeway from a coastal city in Saudi Arabia to connecting it to Bahrain. So
Hmm.
there's a huge clash to be, I believe, in that island between the Persianate realm and the Arabian realm. Jonathan?
Yes. Yes. Just interestingly on that point regarding the Phoenicians, this ties into what uh, again, if you, in my book Blood on the Sand and the Hidden Empire, I make this connection. So I think what we're seeing today, this hidden empire, this invisible hand, this financier clique, I think they began within the Harappan civilization. I think they primarily worshipped uh, this Pashupati deity, which literally means the Lord of all animals. Um, that, if you look at the Pashupati seal and correlate that with the World Tarot card, it's very similar. Um, that that Pashupati seal seems to be synonymous with the likes of course, Cernunnos within the Celtic pantheon, a horned one. Of course, as well, Shiva. Uh,
Mm.
Funnily enough, Pashupati was a sort of pre-Shivite deity. So this all ties in. Bel Amuru, or Lord Amurutu, uh, or Amarutu, meaning the bull calf of the sun god, seems to correlate with that as well, and then you can trace them to the Hyksos. I mean, ultimately, there is a connection here, and it seems to be primarily based around the sun, some sort of sun worship to some degree. Of course, that's not saying that the sun is evil as a symbol or what have you, but it seems that it's something that spurs on or fuels or acts as some sort of greater, has a greater symbolic value within their mystical view of the world, I guess. Something that binds them together.
Hmm.
Yep.
I skipped a question Jonathan, or an observation Jonathan made. He says, when monotheists co opt pagan symbols, it
Mhm.
inevitably opens the door of suspicion. Who co opted whom?
Well, this is something the more and more I've researched this,
Hmm.
it seems to become clear to me that what we know is, again, this might be controversial for some,
Hmm.
so I do apologize in advance, but with the rise of, for example, the Sabazios cult that we mentioned,
Hmm.
and that was something that was pushed primarily by, again, coming from the east, moving westwards into Rome. And by 139 BC, what we see is that, I guess you would call it this cabal, what we would call nowadays as Zionists or what have you. They
Hmm.
were pushing this cult, and they were co-opting Jupiter, and they had this double, um, this portmanteau, this compound title, Jupiter Sabazios, but they also had Zeus Sabaoth or Zeus Sabazios, and then further eastward in Cappadocia and Asia Minor, Anatolia, they had the term Jove or Jove
Hmm.
Sabaoth. That seems to link to Yahweh Seviot. This is a distinct aspect of Yahweh, which is Yahweh, the Lord of the hosts, which
Hmm.
hosts means Lord of the armies. So it's
Oh,
sort of Yahweh in a viewing him in a
Marshall.
very a martial or revolutionary light, which
Okay.
is interesting because you see the likes of, in the French Revolution, the Jacobin society in
Okay.
Brittany and things such as that. It's all very interesting when you look at that. Of course,
Wow.
Brittany was called Amorica, so Amorica, America, Amorites.
Amorites.
It's all quite interesting. I don't know. Of course, I make connections there. I've looked at some linguists as well that have also brought up that rather strange connection between all of these, instances of the name Am or Amor or Amer and the historical conflation with what we would call the conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
For example, the
Yeah.
French Revolution and such. Yeah.
You know the standard narrative for the origin of the name America. I don't believe it one bit. Apparently, it's from this man Amerigo Vespucci. Like, come on, Amerigo Vespucci, some random well, he was Italian, I think, map maker. He is the reason why the New World has continents called North and South America. I don't believe that one bit. America, the name, has to have a much richer origin story, in my opinion.
Yes, it's a total anomaly. It's
Yeah,
just, it's something. I mean, why didn't they call it Colombia?
yeah,
It just doesn't make sense.
doesn't make sense.
It's Yeah, of course, Columbus himself was totally involved in all of this, and he was another one within his famous portrait that showed that Shin hand sign.
Okay,
Um, but yeah, that sign itself, I mean, you could actually trace it back to India with Trishula of Shiva. You can trace it to Atlantis with Poseidon's trident. Poseidon from the Attic,
yeah,
meaning Lord of the Earth. It's a compound in Attic Greek. Lord of the Earth. He had a temple and according to Plato in the Timaeus and Critias, he had a temple in the center of there. But ultimately, digressing back to our topic on Freemasonry,
Please, yeah.
this is the esoteric background that Freemasonry draws from.
Hmm.
And even discussing America, for example. And this links, by the way, to Freemasonry with the Sinclair family of Roslyn Chapel and their travels to America
Oh.
and founding of certain areas, or I guess you would call them colonies, in America, outposts. Again, paving the way for what would later be the establishment, as Francis Bacon called it, of the New Atlantis or the New Jerusalem, the Ben Salem. It's this idea of Zion, Zionism, the
Hmm.
utopia, this sort of revolutionary, radical utopia. But interestingly, with America, with Columbus specifically,
Hmm.
he was totally involved in all of this. He was, I believe, a Knight of Christ.
Even
He was
his
also,
name, Christopher Columbus, CC, right?
yes,
33.
33, yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Go
yeah.
on. Sorry.
The Columbus as well. I mean, Columbia, the dove. The dove is something you see connected or I mean, connected is totally connected with Ishtar
Hmm.
or Asherah or Ashtaroth or Anat, all the way back again to Shiva with Parvati,
Hmm.
or of course you have other aspects of that with the Mahadevi. It's all a trinity in the Vedic religion. But yeah, it's all again. It's a sort of study of comparative religions, but
Hmm.
there seems to be connections here, and that's ultimately why I look for, um, or not look for. I mean, they seem to just crop up. The more
You,
I've studied this,
you recognize the patterns.
Yes,
The
yes, there
patterns,
seems to be a pattern to this. Yeah.
yeah, the patterns are forming. I was just scrolling through Christopher Columbus related photos and paintings. The remains of Christopher Columbus preserved in the University Library of Pavia. And this little relic has a very Masonic uh, geometrical design. And this is his tomb in Seville, Spain.
Mhm.
They don't have the checkerboard floors, the Masonic floors or anything like that, but I'm sure there's some symbol to this. Do you think he was a real person then, Silas? Like he definitely existed in your view?
I would say yes. Armin, of course, this is a point of, I wouldn't say contention, but disagreement between us. I
Okay.
tend I tend to take, again, because I approach it from well, Armin claims a scholarly position. So
Hmm.
I tend to take the available evidence um, just on face value, because otherwise I'm not really a philosopher per se. So I can't, unlike Armin, I
Hmm.
can't really I can't view things in the abstract. So I
Hmm.
have to view things with some sort of supportive evidence.
Yeah, you're
Otherwise,
more
I can't take on them.
like a detective.
Yeah, it's like a detective. I have to deduce. I can't make assumptions from induction, just
Mhm.
from observation of things.
Hmm.
I have to make hypotheses from some form of evidence. Uh,
Observational and evidence.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, shout out to Armin. I don't know if he's here. He mentioned being. I believe he's at work actually, and he might catch us later. But yeah, Christopher Columbus. They've they had this Guardian article say that, oh, he could have been Jewish. It just came out maybe within this month, and I found that very interesting, with the Israeli conflict happening and what to me looks like the dismantlement of Israel in its current format. I find it interesting. They had a Guardian article. You guys can look it up, uh, claiming that Christopher Columbus may have been a Jewish person. What's up with this? I see a lot of statues holding up spherical objects like this.
Mm.
Very interesting. Let me see if I have missed any comments.
Just on that point regarding Columbus being a converso,
Hmm.
there, off the top of my head, I can't recall the notes now, but there is quite a bit of evidence, of course, that you won't find with. I mean, you have to dig for it. This is the problem with the internet nowadays. A lot of it's being just totally scrubbed. The books themselves are very difficult to find.
Yeah,
Um,
they hacked archive.org. Did you hear about that?
yeah,
It's
yep.
it's out of service, and I'm worried because thankfully I used my Google login because I have I'm logged in there, but uh, I believe my credentials and everything are safe because I used my Google sign in. But apparently, if you signed up and borrowed anything from archive.org, the hackers have your password and everything.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Scary.
But it makes you wonder if this, of course, was state sanctioned or,
I
um,
100% think there was some kind of intel aspect,
yeah,
state sponsored hacking.
yeah. And
100%.
of course, as well, they want to know what information you've been looking at. If anyone has leanings where they seem to be thinking for themselves, or
Yeah.
these are things, these are aspects within the population that managerialism seeks to rout out. It does it through the most underhanded and malicious and nefarious tactics, of course.
Isn't it IPS Tim Osman who believes the next psyop is the mind virus? Just like there was the other virus that there was a lockdown for. He says there's going to be a mind like wrong think pandemic.
Oh yes, yeah.
You remember him talking about that?
I haven't heard him specifically talk about that. No, uh, I never get quite enough time to listen to other creators nowadays.
Same.
Um, um, but he is correct on that. Yeah, there is a brain worm, I guess, going through the Western psyche at the moment, and I think a lot of people. I mean, even for example, look at social media. Look at
Hmm.
the negative effects that it's had, not just on the cognitive ability of the Western populations, but the literal psychology of it, of them. So
So
the
true.
mental illness is at an all time high because of social media, and of course the managerialist system wants this. They desire this because it ensures a population that are malleable, easily controllable, and can't resist the momentum, the onward, the onslaught of the agenda. You know,
Mm,
yeah. So I agree with him on that point. Absolutely.
yeah. Uh, well, I wanted to ask you. So, oh yeah. Uh, Speaking about that, like I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it in real time. Like if you look at like I don't really like bringing this up, but there used to be a Reddit community that was comedy themed that I was an OG member of, and the devolved nature of this community is a really good example of what you're talking about. Um, there's this thing called lol cow culture, and they're focused on eccentric characters on the internet, who are kind of enthralled by or enslaved by this social media engagement uh, rat race. So they make fun of people like that, but the fun doesn't even seem fun. It's like you could tell they're hurt people. And it's all over. I'm just using that community as an example, but it's all over the internet. all these hurt uh, communities, and a
Mm.
lot of anger. Look at Twitter. Twitter is so full of venom. Uh, Whenever I go on Twitter, 2 3 minutes, and I'm disgusted by the.
Yeah, I can
Yeah,
relate to that. Yeah.
you know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's just,
Hmm.
and in my opinion, this guy Elon Musk, he set it up that way as a honeypot. As a honeypot, I believe a lot of people might be prosecuted sometime down the line for the the nastiness they're compelled to write, thinking they're in an echo chamber, but they don't know it's a trap.
Yes, absolutely. You see a lot of that on, of course. Well, within a managerialist society, the the managerialist regime will seek to they'll sort of seek to control and to steer the discourse, and the way that they do that is through, of course, they may uh, through psychological operatives seed certain narrative ideas, right? Now, again, they don't have to directly control people. This isn't what it's
Mm,
about. The
mm,
the, the way that they administer, or again steer the discourse, is by from the from the out the external um, area, I guess, or the from a a vantage point, I guess. They will seed certain ideas within that camp, that ideological camp. The ideological camp might have been totally created by them themselves, and they will use these certain ideas
mm,
to infect and steer and perhaps neuter any resistance that could come from that grass movement idea, ideology, a religious movement, any movement really of people. Um, yeah, and it's, I mean, ultimately what they're seeking to do. I mean, even for example, the woke progressive stuff.
mhm.
Those people aren't doing that from a point of malice. They don't. They, deep down inside, they're good people. They're just
Yeah, the heart's in the right place.
impressionable and gullible. Yeah, and that's the thing, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So again, they people have been steered towards hell. You
Mm,
know, they believe that they're going to heaven, right, if you will, in a sort of analogous sense. They believe they're creating a utopia. They don't realize they're actually at the forefront of deconstructing absolutely everything.
mm.
Of course, that's a combination of data and ideological fanaticism, and of course, as well, probably social media and its, the effects it has on cognitive decline. But
Yeah,
yeah,
the TikTokization of your attention. They, you know, that is, it's so pervasive. It's manifesting in other areas, like the memorizing the Quran is a key aspect of Islamic education. To be a hafiz was an esteemed hafiz was someone who completely memorized the Quran. It used to be like an esteemed position, and it wasn't rare. Like every village, let's say 10% of a community would be a hafiz, would memorize the Quran from cover to cover, and that has been on a steady decline. And people tell me, like the older generations, they tell me the younger kids nowadays, they have such a difficulty memorizing the Quran. Uh, the the number of hufaz, people who are fully memorizers, has dwindled, and I think it's because attention, as a like attention spans have been, you know, crippled, and it's manifesting in a lot of ways. Oh
yes.
yeah, things short on YouTube, YT, YouTube as well is like their answer to TikTok. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead,
Oh
Silas.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, short form content and doom scrolling through it. Doom scrolling is essentially just going through your news feed and just, you're in a sort of hypnagogic state, and you're
Yeah.
just, mindlessly going, scrolling through it. It's similar
Guilty.
to Homer's Odyssey, that idea of the lotus eaters, just this
Uh-huh. Yeah.
mindlessly passing the time. You know, you,
Consumers. That's what they mean. The consumer with the O me.
yeah, zoom, zoom, consume. That
Yeah.
that sort of mindset, it's brain rot. A managerialist regime want that type of population, but the problem with that type of population is you get a precipitous decline in innovators coming from that population, like what you're mentioning. Um, Individuals don't, well, firstly, they don't, of course, they have a cognitive decline, their memory declines, all of it. There's been studies done
Mm.
on, developing developing adolescent minds
Oh.
when they come into contact with, you would call it short form content or doom scrolling or
Mm.
anything like that. They have, a precipitous decline in memory, reasoning skills, problem solving, all of this, because it puts you into a very, what would the word be, lethargic or lackadaisical
Hmm.
mentality, where you're just mindlessly zoom, zoom, consume.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is when you have these complex systems within a managerialist society of bureaucratic departments within bureaucratic departments. You have complex logistical systems that are just in time and all of this. If you begin to have, um, if your population begins to exhibit cognitive decline en masse,
Hmm.
and there's less and less innovators being born every generation, then all of these systems will eventually collapse. You'll have a competency crisis. And of
Hmm.
course, as well, with the lack of innovators, um, you're going to get essentially the Malthusian nightmare, because the innovators themselves, and they create labor saving technologies and other technologies which increase agricultural yield. So essentially, what you're leading to, the trajectory of travel, if you keep zoom, zoom consuming
Hmm.
and doom scrolling, is uh, the population will not be able to sustain themselves. The civilization won't sustain itself, and
It's
it will die.
it will collapse on its own on its own weight.
Yes,
From its own weight.
because
Yeah.
because they wanted an easily controllable society. But this is, and again, this was all born out of their paranoia and their need to perpetuate their own position of power. But what that does in response to that, is subsequently essentially neuter the civilization. No innovation, no energy to do anything,
Wow.
low productivity yield. You're seeing that today, actually,
Hmm.
from East Asia to the West. And people are just dropping out of the society. They're dropping out of the job market. Um,
They're not
for
even seeking out relationship or pair bonding.
Yeah,
They're turning into recluse. Do you think this explains the recluse hermit phenomenon in like the medieval era, with a lot of the better thinker types, as let's say in the collapse of Byzantine Rome, 7th century, just before the Futuhat, right, the conquest of the Muslims, there were a lot of these Christian monks who would go to the caves and just isolate themselves. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, before he became a prophet, he would also do this. He would kind of um, uh, quarantine himself from the Meccan pagan society that he was, he was a businessman. He was an importer exporter, going back and forth between Syria and Hijaz. So he was in the middle of that society. He wasn't, somebody who was like uh, cocooned from everyday life. But because society was in his uh, and there were a few other people. They were called Hanif. There was a name for it because they didn't know the Muslim wasn't a thing. They called themselves Hanif, and they just believed to be following the Sunnah of Abraham. They would go to these caves and just meditate, avoid civilization. And Muhammad was one of those people, one of those Hanifs. And in one of his cave sojourns, he was visited in like a violent type encounter, the angel Gabriel. And the angel Gabriel told him, Iqra. And Iqra means recite. And Prophet Muhammad, who wasn't schooled, he didn't have the like he didn't go through scribe school or whatever existed back then. So he was basically illiterate. So he responded to this apparition in front of him. I can't read, mani biqari. I can't read. And then Gabriel grabbed him almost violently, and he said again, "Iqra," right? Recite, almost in a commanding tone. And then Prophet Muhammad concedes, what do I recite? What do you want me to recite? And he says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq al-insana min alaq. And this was the very first Quranic verses revealed to a human being. So it's just funny how the dropping out from society, what we're witnessing in Japan, Korea, from a lot of the young male population, it happened. It happened to Muhammad. Muhammad was 25 years old, and a 40-year-old woman proposed to him, right? People keep slandering beloved Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, as a pedophile and all that. But his very first wife, Khadija, radiallahu anh, she was 15 years his senior, and she proposed to him. That's another aspect that shows you, the way Islam is depicted as this patriarchal, uh, we choose for you, your daughter's her life trajectory. Like, no, uh, Khadija was a self-made woman. She was successful. She was Muhammad's boss. He was uh, managing cargo that belonged to merchandise that belonged to Khadija, selling it in Syria and beyond. So she was so impressed with his professional work. He was a good worker. She, nothing about him being a prophet, because it was 15 years later that Gabriel appeared to him. So for the first 15 years, it was only because he was exactly someone who in 2024 would be cutting himself out of this social media decade. Like Prophet Muhammad in 2024 wouldn't have a Twitter account, in my opinion, or wouldn't be on YouTube. He would be avoiding all of that stuff. I'm just injecting an Islamic angle, and it's my perception. It might not even be correct, so I just wanted to add
It's,
that.
it's, it's almost very similar to what we see with the Essenes, or I mean, even the Gnostics as well.
The Gnostic, yeah,
The
they
of
were.
course Gnosticism is very broad, but yeah. Sorry.
No. Uh, I'm a slow talker, so if I cut you off, it doesn't mean I have something something to add. Please continue.
All right. Okay. Right. No problem. Yeah. So Gnosticism, of course, very broad, but they would do the same thing as Jonathan mentioned. Ascetic monks,
Mm,
asceticism, and
mm.
of course that we see that with Buddhism. We see that with Dharmic religions as well. Interestingly, even the Sabines, the people of Haran, the
Right.
Mandaeans. I think the Islamic the peoples around the Mandaeans call them uh,
Sabian.
Sabines. Yeah,
Sabian. Yeah.
Sabians.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, that traces back to their people of the book, or they were
Yeah. I've never met one, by the
categorized
way.
as such.
I've
No,
never
I
met.
mean they're very rare.
Yeah, there's small
Uh,
community, and I think they're only in Iraq now, like the southern uh, parts of Iraq where the Tigris and the Euphrates become a delta. Speaking of Iraq, um, what you said about the Sumerian Dharmic connection or Indian connection, you know what? You can kind of see it if you go to Iraq. Iraq is kind of, people say it's, Sunni, Shia, and Kurd. There's a geographic aspect to the Sunni Shia Kurd division, and it manifests almost on a historical basis. The Shia today, they live in the southern part of Iraq, right? And this was exactly where Sumer was, like its headquarters, you might say.
mhm,
The Sunnis, they more demographically, you find them. It's called the Sunni Triangle. It's the central part of the country, and it's Baghdad, Tikrit, Fallujah, and those areas. If you look at the parts of Mesopotamia that the Babylonian Empire was centered on, it's where the Sunnis today live. And then finally, the Kurds, they're more in the mountainous north, Mosul, Irbil, Kirkuk, where all the oil is also found, Turkish border. And that is exactly where the Assyrian Empire had its base,
mhm.
right? So the Nineveh and all that. The Sumerians, just like the southern Iraqis, you almost see an South Asian connection. Man, if you go to Basra, a lot of the Iraqis there, they kind of almost look like Gujaratis and Bengalis. Some of them are so dark, like they look like me. Like yeah, there was an African input from the Zenj and so on, but I think the Sumerians, they were, and the language proves it. They weren't a Semitic people. They were taken over by the Akkadians who came from Arabia and so on, and
Mhm. Yeah,
Semiticized the Fertile Crescent. But that whole place had a much more Indus Valley Harappa type vibe
yeah,
back in the day. That's my belief. And the people there were more like Indian type instead of the more Mesopotamian, Arabic, Babylonian, Assyrian type now. That's the Iraqi population now.
yeah. You're correct. The Sumerian language itself is a language isolate, so
Language, actually, yeah.
it doesn't have any, apart from loan words here and there that are found within a religious context. You don't really see any connections in terms of the syntax or the grammar or
100%.
vocabulary
Yeah, like
with the
Anunnaki, for
Sumerian.
instance. Yeah, there's no Semitic word for Enlil or Anunnaki. That's even how it's pronounced. But sorry.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. The Anunnaki, yeah, from heaven to earth, or the children of heaven and earth, yeah.
Yeah.
Enlil, Lord of the air. Of course, it's interesting because that Enlil, or the Lilitu, which were air demons, or princes of the air, these sort of principalities as we would know them in the West, right, with the Christian terminology. Uh,
Mm.
this is something that the Semitic peoples actually borrowed. This was a word they borrowed, a loan word. And in Hebrew, for example, because of the Hyksos connections, you see quite a lot of loan words from uh, Egyptian, for example. I
Hmm.
have a list of them in my notes somewhere. There's about 300 or so of them.
Oh, wow.
There's more than that, but these are just primarily religious loan words. So there's a connection there, of course, which links back to the Hyksos. But interestingly, Lilith, that appears within the Bible, it appears more prominently, by the way, within Kabbalah, within the Zohar
Right.
creation myth. where, I mean, I won't actually repeat what's mentioned in the Zohar, but anyway, just to cut a long story short and
Hmm.
to leave out the profanity, uh, the Zohar creation myth is that it states that Lilith was the first of Adam's wives, and she rebelled essentially,
Oh.
and then Eve was formed. Um, to cut a long story short, so funnily enough, Lilith itself, that within Hebrew, it is almost verbatim the Lilitu
Oh.
in terms of the loan word comparison. So, and even the way it's utilized within the rest of the Zohar and sort of other mystical commentaries, both contemporary and historical, on
Hmm.
the Zohar itself as well, what's called in Hebrew the Agada.
Wow.
Um, all of this seems to tie back with the Sumerian conception of the Lilitu, and of course the Akkadians took it as well, with Enlil, Lilitu is a category of demons as well. Again, that all ties back to the Sumerians. It's quite interesting, but it's
Yeah.
something they took, I guess. It was a loan word from Sumerian.
Hmm. Interesting. Silas, we're kind of almost uh, to the end of our interesting talk. I wanted to ask you this. I don't know if you're a movie buff, but you, I'm sure every Scotsman gets asked this. But have you watched Braveheart?
Yeah, I have actually. Yeah, yeah.
You
I think
are.
everyone in Scotland has.
So
You don't get to keep your citizenship unless you have.
it's almost like a requirement, required viewing, huh? The
Yes,
Braveheart
yes,
movie.
yeah.
What's your take on Mel Gibson? What's your opinion on Mel Gibson?
As an actor, just in general,
In general and as an actor, both.
as an actor, I mean, he's quite good. He's a good producer as well. He's a good writer, director.
Yeah, that
He's made some
Apocalypto
interesting.
movie is good, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
that's actually my favorite one of
same.
his.
Yeah, same.
That's something that deals with civilizational decline and such, and religiosity, secular. Deals with everything we've talked
Yeah.
with here, I guess. But anyway, in terms of in general what he's mentioned regarding, I guess, Hollyweird, as I call it,
Thank you.
uh, I I would say he's on point. I'm also a musician, so
Oh,
I've been to certain. Well, just recently, actually, I was at a songwriters camp, I guess, at in Alicante or near Alicante, and I was meeting some, I guess we'd call them industry professionals, right? They're producers that work in the industry. They're not, well, one of them had worked with Ellie Goulding, and there was a few others, right? But the general sense you get of them is they are complete. Well, firstly, I mean, they typify just the hyper individualized pseudo human being. And I don't mean that in a, I'm not meaning that in a bellicose or insulting way. It's just literally how they come across. They're very one dimensional. Uh, I mean, the copious amount of drugs they were doing, drink. I'm probably the only Scotsman that doesn't really drink. I don't, I don't. It's not something I do. Apart from at Christmas, I'll have a bottle of mead, quite like that, or a dram of whiskey. I'll have that at Christmas. Um,
do you think all drinking and like mind altering social cultures is like artificially created? What I mean is like there are places where vodka is the every like you want to socialize, you sit down with the boys, you grab some vodka. Some places it's whiskey, some places it's scotch, right? So it seems like mind altering socializing is a
Mhm.
cultural need almost. But do you think?
I well, I have a theory regarding this, and it's something I think other people have expressed. So, in the northern hemisphere, and I think this is probably true within more arid environments such as the Middle East, when
Mhm.
it comes to nighttime, obviously it gets really quite cold. And
Yeah,
if you're a Bedouin nomad, of course, this is pre-Islam, right? So, or even, I mean, prior to Egyptian civilization, you were perhaps a subsistence farmer, or maybe you were a hunter gatherer. It gets to that point where it gets quite cold, even with the heat of the fire.
mm,
And drink can be a companion to one who is cold, I guess. So
yeah,
can mind altering drugs. So it's something I think in Europe at least.
yeah,
I think it developed due to the winter.
and more northern latitudes.
Yes. Yeah, well, yeah, northern latitudes, I think it was more prevalent with. So we would have magic mushrooms are still, of course, quite popular here, but it's something that was traditionally
Yeah,
done all the way back as far as we can see. Even some of the bog people that the mummified bog people we dig up, they
yeah,
seem to have psilocybin and such in their bellies or their systems. So I think it was a way for them to get through the winter because winters were quite harsh pre pre-civilization, pre-urban environments. So, um, in my own personal opinion, with what we have now, I don't. With all of the social afflictions of alcohol, it's something I agree with Islam on.
100%.
I don't tend to think it should. I don't really think it should be legalized per se, but you would have a very difficult time in trying to outlaw it. I know
Yeah,
Muslims myself that are from Pakistan,
mhm,
and they drink.
yeah,
Of course, they don't do it in front of their mothers and fathers and grandmothers and grandparents, but they do. They consume alcohol whenever we're out. I'm the only one at the table usually with water or
I've
some
known
sort.
I've known a few Muslims who who drink,
Mhm,
smoke weed. Yeah, when it's almost it's not good to snitch on your brethren, but I'd say growing up, it was maybe 50-50. It was 50-50 between those who did and didn't, and then the ones who didn't. I mean, the ones who did, like you said, they didn't do it at home, so their parents weren't aware of it. But but yeah, there were many Muslims who were drinking. Uh, I'm not gonna lie, I've tasted alcohol. I haven't drank a sip of alcohol in my adult life, but well, no, I can't say that because a teenager is considered a baligh in Islam. But I've tasted alcohol. I've tasted marijuana. I know the pros and the cons. And the funny thing about Islam with alcohol, when Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam uh, brought on the prohibition of it, he the Quran revealed it in a gradual manner. It wasn't like overnight smash all your wine bottles, because
mhm,
a lot of the Muslims were. It was just uh, there was this beverage made out of fermented date. It was like a wine, so they were drinking alcoholic beverages were common, wines and beers and so on. But when the Quran revealed, it revealed in stages. It first revealed uh, that there's benefits, but harms, and the harms outweigh the benefits. And then it said, the next verse was, "O people who believe, do not come to the masjid inebriated," because people were coming to to perform salah like all hungover and drunk, right? So he was doing it slowly, slowly, and then finally, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "No more drinking, haram." right? But only after, like, I think it was, uh, don't quote me on the timeline, but over like 3 years or something like that, that these verses were revealed.
Hmm.
And um, the medicinal aspects of alcohol was never haram. The second caliph, Umar radiallahu an, he used to bathe in like an alcoholic solution because of all the wounds he received from like spears and whatnot. Apparently
Yeah,
there was,
the sterilizing properties of it and that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that was happening, and but yeah, uh, I think when they tried prohibition in the 1920s, I think that was a psyop.
Oh, totally. Well, it made people drink more,
It made people drink more, 100%.
and heavier liquors as well that weren't even regulated. So you had moonshiners that were, creating what
Somehow.
I believe some of them were 100 proof, or
Wow.
things such as that. And
Oh,
things you would use as fuel for internal combustion cars and things. People were drinking it. It's insane.
so almost like ethanol.
Yeah, pure ethanol. Yeah, put a flame to it, and it turns into a highly combustible, you
Yeah.
know, explosive. Totally insane, and people were drinking it.
And
Mhm.
yeah, they also had the Al Capone psyop with the
Yeah.
smuggling, and they even had the prohibitionist psyop. I forgot her name, but I was looking it up. This lady who would smash like beer bottles in bars. I forgot her name, but when you look at the person, it's 100% a man in drag.
Oh yeah,
It's
yeah.
one of
Mhm.
those like you could tell it's one of those Baphomet creatures, right?
If we ever do another discussion, I could maybe touch upon the androgynous agenda, I guess, going all the way back
That is
to all of these esoteric cults, the Attic cult as well, or Attis and Kybele and Magna Mater and all of this.
the
But yeah,
Hijras in India and so on.
yeah.
Oh, I am so I really do want to discuss that. Rebecca is also someone who's really expert on the androgyny and the FTM MTF agenda and the esoteric aspects of it all. So absolutely, we should talk about this. Whenever we have our next interview talk, and I want it to happen as soon as possible, inshallah. Let me see if there's any questions in the chat we're missing. Linda says the drink is never supposed to take charge. People allow it to. Yeah, that's how when you're reliant on a substance, that's how like dependence occurs. Is when you let that substance, whatever it is, take control, become the priority.
Oh yeah, yeah. You see it with university students quite. I mean, it should. The total irony of it, you need your mental faculties, yet they're
Uh,
destroying it, and they have this sort of Goliardic experience of revelry when they're at university. And yeah, absolutely. You can't have again, like what we were discussing with social media, you can't have a population that have been mentally and cognitively um, debilitated by social media and doom scrolling and
100%.
the short form content, and then believe that they're going to drink responsibly, use it as a relaxant and just maybe a little dram of whiskey at night to help them calm down. No, they're going to drink in excess, and the alcohol will control them. It will possess them like a demon, almost.
Yes, that's why they call a lot of the liquors spirits, right? The
Yeah.
possessive aspect of alcohol consumption is scary stuff.
We call whiskey here in our native Gaelic tongue as ushkave, which is the
Ushkabit,
water of life.
ushkabit.
If you've ever drunk whiskey, I can imagine it. Well, you have the sterilizing properties of alcohol and such.
Oh,
It's
right,
not the
yeah.
water of life; it kills life. But yeah, so that's the
It-
irony.
It's almost
Yeah.
like a tongue-in-cheek name.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, my friend Silas, this has been wonderful. You are a highbrow guest. I hope to have you on, and hope my listeners benefited from our conversation. Everyone, go check out Silas Speaks. He's on YouTube. He also has a Patreon. You can find uh, a bibliography of all his books, I believe, on Goodreads.com. Just overall, I'll tell you this: he's a good listen when you're driving and you just need somebody to listen to. Armin is the same. These people are good listens when you're just on the road driving, and um, you need to have some uh, cerebral um, stimulation while you're, hypnotized by the road, by the asphalt. I suggest you check out their content. Do you have anything else to add, Silas?
No, it was a pleasure being here, and I thank you everyone for commenting. I thank you for inviting me here. I do apologize. I think we missed a few of your questions,
Oh
but
no,
I
no,
go in massive tangents when we
same,
discuss these topics. So
same.
I do
No, that that
apologize for
that,
that.
that was just a skeleton kind of theme to, it wasn't meant to be like we have to follow this word for word. So no, this was great, man. Thank you so much. I learned as I was talking to you. Like, as when I end this stream, like what we talked about will I'll keep it in mind. I'll still remember it. Oh, I wanted to add observation of mine, a personal observation. This is why I pulled up the Braveheart uh, image. What do you see with the mask, the blue mask? I see, and this is just me. And you know what? You're right about Mel Gibson's talent in both acting and directing and all that. There was a aspect of Mel Gibson that I think was completely performative, and that is his anti-Semitism. That was fake, fake, fake.
Hmm.
If you are an actor, you are controlled by Zionists. And this is what I think. I think this blue face paint is something Israel themed, Zionist
Yeah,
themed.
from the river to the yeah, from the Brook of Egypt, so from the Nile to the Euphrates.
Yeah,
Yeah.
look at it, look at it. This is Israel's map on his
Hmm.
face. The map of Israel is on his face. So, and the blue in Scotland and the blue in the Israeli flag. I think maybe we might need to talk about that in the future. But I think the Scottish Rite lodges had something to do with the flags and British Israelism and all that, and Zionism, and you know, the Jews needed a declaration from a British lord. Yeah, he was Jewish, but he was a British lord, Lord
Hmm.
Balfour. So this symbiotic Anglo-Zionist relationship is a
Hmm.
very serious thing. It controls culture. I don't trust when they like Jonathan Stu Peters. I don't know, his anti-Semitism. I think is the Mel Gibson type. I honestly think it's an act. That's just my opinion. And me being someone who was into physiognomy, I'm tongue tied now. Let's just say
Physiognomy.
physiognomy. Thank you, physiognomy and um, physical features and anthropology and so on. Honestly, Stu Peters has some Ashkenazi features in his face, but that's just my opinion. Mel Gibson, no, but Stu, I do see like Jewish. I don't think. See, when they try to make Jewish features something negative or ugly, I don't agree with that. I think Jews are good looking people personally, but he looks Jewish to me. Well, that's just all I gotta say. Do you have any final thoughts, my friend?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that we never got to the Stone of Destiny. We can discuss that in the next stream, and also the Radonites. And
Oh yes, I know about that.
show, I can show a tie-in between, or an intermarriage between the Merovingian, Frankish Merovingian line, which eventually became the Carolingians and Charlemagne. I can show that, how that connects.
Okay, I'll keep
Um,
that in mind. I'll write
yeah.
that down actually, because I really don't want to not forget.
Obviously, that links with Balfour as well. I think somebody mentioned the Normans here.
Oh yeah.
Um, there's a certain book, and I can't remember now. I'll get the notes for the next stream, but the Normans and Hebrews were very much interconnected through Rollo. Rollo was the first Duke of Normandy. He was
Oh
a Norman, a Viking, essentially.
wow.
But yeah, all of this connects. Balfour is a Norman name, of course. Frank,
Wow. I was
French
wondering,
Norman.
yeah, what the because I was wondering, is it Baal, like Baal worship, Baal, like I'm doing this for Baal, for Baal, or but it makes sense that it's a European name. It does not sound anything Semitic, in my opinion. So, wow, very interesting. But I guess that's it, Silas. Thank you so much, my friend. Everyone go check out Silas. I'm going to put all the links, uh, a comment at the end of this live stream. I'm going to excuse Silas now, and he's also in the server. So if you have any questions to ask Silas and you're a member in our Discord, ask him away. Um, he's, a lot of times when you get, you know, intelligent people, they usually aren't approachable. They kind of have a like an attitude about them, but I'm glad he's a good guy. He seems approachable. Uh, now I'm confident enough to try to interview Miles Mathis. I was worried Silas is going to be a grumpy guy, but no, he's a cool, approachable guy. So maybe Miles Mathis is also a cool, approachable guy. I should try to get him on, and I'm going to do a lot more interviews of people like Silas, Armin, and so on. So if you're not subscribed, make sure to subscribe. Uh, what else? So yeah, I think I covered everything I wanted to ask. There are a few things we uh, didn't cover. Kareem had a good observation about the steam engine um, starting in Scotland. I think the Industrial Revolution and the fact that a lot of the earliest inventors were Scottish, I think there was an esoteric reason for it. I think the fact that the oldest lodges were in Edinburgh and Glasgow, uh, Scotland Yard was the first police unit, police service in the world. I think they all have a connection. There was a book about how Scotland is responsible for like 90% of inventions or Scottish people. So that's why I brought up Silas. Um, by the way, Kyung in the server, I think I mentioned this in the beginning of the live stream. He used to always uh, refer or share Silas's content with us. So if you are in the server and you know someone who has insight of any kind, and you might think he'll be a contribution to the Bach Precision channel, please name names, bring them up, share their content. Right? Let us um, try to make this space a think tank so that we learn and grow and become kind of enlightened. Let's use the internet for good. Likewise, Silas. And with that, I guess, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.